All right, so today we are diving deep into something pretty interesting and mysterious. Uh, the Bilderberg Group.
Ooh, very secretive.
Yeah, so to unpack all this, we're going to be looking at an Al Jazeera English YouTube video called Inside Story: How Powerful is the Bilderberg Group?
Oh,
And just to kind of pique your interest a little bit more, we've got some pretty big names attending these meetings every year. We're talking about like prime ministers,
wow.
heads of the IMF, former intelligence
Right.
chiefs,
Oh, wow.
even tech giants like, Google. But here's the catch. It's all behind closed doors. No press allowed.
Oh,
So that leads to a lot of questions about, well, what's really going on? Is it just harmless networking? Are they like
right.
deciding who the future world leaders are going to be? Or is there something a little bit sinister going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating how they've managed to like operate under the radar for so long.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, well, they have a lot of influence potentially.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of kick things off, what is the Bilderberg Group exactly?
Well, it's a private annual conference,
Uh-huh.
and it brings together like around 130 of the world's most influential figures from politics, finance, industry, and media.
Mm.
So it's like, a high-level brainstorming session for like the global elite.
Okay, but if it's just brainstorming, why all the secrecy? Like the video, the Al Jazeera video, talks about how there are no minutes kept. They don't take any votes. They
Right.
don't issue any official statements. And everyone who attends is bound by the Chatham House rule. So they can use the information, but they can't tell anybody who said what.
Yeah, and I think that's what fuels like a lot of the suspicion and speculation, right?
Yeah.
Because it's so secretive, it's like, well, what are they talking about? So that kind of leads to all sorts of conspiracy theories.
Like a shadow world government pulling the strings from behind the scenes.
We think,
Or, just kind of more subtly shaping global agendas and
yeah,
policies. To get an idea of how that might work, it's helpful to look at who's attending these meetings. And the video gives us a glimpse into the 2016 meeting. And the list is pretty impressive.
yeah, it is. You've got people like Mark Rutte, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Charles Michel, who was Prime Minister of Belgium,
Hmm.
Christine Lagarde, who was the head of the IMF at the time.
Okay, so we're already talking some serious power players here.
Absolutely.
Um, but I do wonder, is this really like, does this group represent global power? Or is it more Western-centric?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that, a lot of people criticize the group for, because while they do have some representation from other parts of the world, the majority of people who attend tend to be from Europe and North America.
Right.
So yeah, it does make you wonder how much that skews the conversation.
The 2016 list also includes some former heads of intelligence agencies, so John Sars from MI6, David Petraeus, the former CIA director,
Okay.
and then there's also CEOs from major corporations.
Right.
Shell, HSBC, Alphabet Inc., which owns Google.
So it's like this really potent mix of political and financial and technological power all in one room.
It is. And I think that's why it attracts so much attention, right? Because it's like, here's this group of, arguably some of the most influential people on the planet, and they're all meeting in secret.
Yeah. So, I mean, knowing who attends these meetings, why do you think there's so much suspicion and debate surrounding this group? Is it justified? Are they really like these puppet masters controlling the world? Or is it just a bunch of powerful people networking and sharing ideas?
Well, I mean, the truth is probably somewhere in between, as it often is.
Okay.
But I think to get a better sense of, where the truth might lie, we have to kind of look at both sides.
Yeah.
So, like, what are the arguments for and against the Bilderberg Group, and what are they actually doing? What kind of influence do they have? Yeah. So, the video presents a couple of different perspectives. J. Scott Smith, who's a professor of diplomatic history, makes the argument that these informal discussions between leaders, they can be valuable, right? He says that, throughout history, leaders have used these types of gatherings to talk about issues and to build relationships.
Yeah.
Like backroom diplomacy has always been a part of international relations, right?
Right. But like, does that actually benefit everyone?
Yeah,
Or is it just benefiting the people in the room?
that's a good point.
That's what we have to figure out.
Yeah. And Katie Wright, who's the head of global affairs at Oxfam, she brings up this point about who's not there. She says, there's nothing inherently wrong with people talking,
Yeah.
but she says we need to ask who's not there.
Right.
Because if you think about it, the people who are most affected by the decisions that are being discussed, the general public, they're not even in the room.
Exactly. And that's one of the big criticisms, right? Because it does create this inherent power imbalance.
Yeah.
And It makes you think about, well, what kind of corporate lobbying is happening? Is there undue influence on policy decisions because of these meetings?
Yeah. And I think this example of Airbus really gets you thinking about the impact of these meetings. Because the
Yeah.
video says that the initial deals to form Airbus, which is like this huge aerospace giant, were reportedly struck at a Bilderberg meeting back in the late 90s.
Hmm.
I mean, if that's true, that's a pretty big deal, right?
Yeah, it suggests that they're not just talking, they're actually, like, things are happening.
Hmm.
And those things have, like, real tangible outcomes that shape industries,
Yeah.
potentially even influence global markets.
Hmm. Speaking of action, let's talk about Brexit. So, the 2016 Bilderberg meeting, which happened right before the Brexit vote, was focused on European unity. And the chairman of Bilderberg at the time, Henri de Castries, told the Financial Times that a Brexit would be a disaster for the EU. So, coincidence? Or, was there some sort of calculated effort to influence the outcome of the vote?
It is interesting to note that, several financial institutions that have significant interests in the EU, like Goldman
Mm.
Sachs, JP Morgan, they donated heavily to the Remain campaign.
Mm.
So, were those donations influenced by discussions at Bilderberg? Who knows?
Yeah.
It's impossible to say for sure, but it definitely raises questions about, how much lobbying is happening at these high levels
Yeah.
and how much influence do they have. It's interesting. They try to balance this image as being like a forum for open discussion, but then they're so secretive. They're actually registered as a charity.
Really?
It's like a stated aim of public education.
But everything they do is like the opposite of transparent.
Exactly. It's kind of ironic,
Yeah.
especially when you look at who funds this supposed charity, right? Goldman Sachs, BP.
Okay, so not exactly like champions of transparency and public access.
Right, right. And I think that contradiction really highlights the debate surrounding Bilderberg, right? Like,
Mhm.
should elected officials
Mhm.
who are accountable to the public be participating in these super secret meetings with, corporate interests?
I mean, it makes you wonder, if these discussions are supposed to benefit everyone, why so secretive?
Right.
If they really want to educate the public, shouldn't we know at least a little bit about what they're talking about?
Right. I mean, transparency is crucial for accountability, especially when you're talking about decisions that impact so many people, potentially billions.
Right.
But then some people argue that because it's informal, it's closed door,
Mm.
that's what makes it effective.
Okay.
That's what allows people to, like, speak openly and honestly.
Right. So it's like that classic argument in favor of backroom dealings. But if there's no transparency, how can we know that those conversations are for the greater good?
Yeah, and not just for the people in the room.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's important to remember that even within the group, there's a range of opinions.
Oh, for sure.
So some might be there thinking, yeah, we're working to make the world better for everyone.
Right.
And others might be a little more focused on their own personal agendas.
Right.
When people are people.
Right.
So even at that level.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like, way back when, like the Enlightenment thinkers would gather in these salons,
Yeah.
but with way higher stakes.
Right, right.
And speaking of how things are changing, the video mentions this transition from the old boys club
Right.
to include these, high-tech figures like Eric Schmidt, Peter Thiel.
Yeah, it's the very deliberate shift, right, to
Mm.
include these tech giants, because that reflects how influential Silicon Valley is.
Right.
And the tech sector in general. They're like a major force now on the global stage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that makes me wonder about the discussions that might be happening at Bilderberg around stuff like, data privacy, artificial intelligence.
Oh,
Like,
right.
what's the future of the internet?
Yet all that's on the table. So it's not just about traditional power structures anymore.
Hmm.
It's about understanding how those structures are being influenced by these, tech billionaires.
Right. So it adds like a whole new layer of complexity.
Yeah.
And it makes you think, are these tech figures bringing new ideas to the table, innovative solutions? Or are they just there to, advance their own interests and become even more powerful?
Exactly.
It feels like we're trying to solve a puzzle, but we're missing some pieces,
Right.
We know who the players are. We kind of know what they're talking about, but it's still a mystery. It makes you rethink, like, global politics in general.
It does. And I think that's one of the best things about these deep dives. It forces us to challenge our assumptions
Yeah.
and really grapple with how complicated these issues are, power and influence.
Yeah.
Especially in today's world, things are changing so fast.
Right.
So, it's not about saying this group is bad or buying into conspiracy theories, but it's about understanding what's really happening, asking the right questions.
Absolutely. So what does all this mean for the people listening to us?
Well, hopefully you have a better understanding